Welcome and thank you for joining us today for Secure Coding Practices, Growing Success or Zero-Day Epidemic. My name is Raleigh Gould and I will be moderating today's event. Our featured speaker is Ken Buckler, Research Director covering Information Security, Risk and Compliance Management at EMA. Ken has over 15 years of industry experience as a noted information and cybersecurity practitioner, software developer, author, and presenter focusing on endpoint security. With a focus on strict federal security standards, Ken has consulted with numerous federal organizations, including Defense Information Systems Agency, Departments of Veterans Affairs, and the Census Bureau. And I'd like to go ahead and turn it over to our featured speaker, Ken Buckler. Ken?
Hey, thank you, Raleigh. I really appreciate that great introduction. Now, something I'd like to take a moment here to really thank Security Journey for all of their help with sponsoring this. This couldn't have been possible without the sponsorship of Security Journey. And Security Journey helps enterprises reduce vulnerabilities with application security education for developers and everyone in the software development lifecycle. The two application security training companies became one in 2022 when HackEDU acquired Security Journey and adopted the Security Journey name. Today, Security Journey offers robust application security education tools to help developers and the entire SDLC team recognize and understand vulnerabilities and threats and proactively mitigate these risks. Foundational knowledge for all, hands-on, skills-based sandboxes for developers, one path to build a security-first culture. Start your journey to safer apps at securityjourney.com. Now, before we dive into the data, let's take a look at the current state of secure coding practices and software vulnerabilities. From 2015 to 2021, the number of new vulnerabilities per year in the National Vulnerability Database grew from 6,487 to 20,139. This increase in vulnerabilities may be due to a significant skills gap when it comes to secure software development. In 2019, a review of the top 20 computer science schools across the United States found that of the schools listed, only one had security as an undergraduate degree requirement for computer science. So, what conclusions can we draw from these trends? Simply put, software developers are not being taught secure coding practices at colleges and universities. Most colleges and universities only focus on programming fundamentals and consider security an advanced topic outside of the scope of their degree programs. And with a significant number of organizations failing to invest in any secure coding training whatsoever, even some of the most seasoned developers in the industry may have little to no awareness of secure coding concepts. With this alarming rate of increasing software vulnerabilities and a significant security skills gap for software developers across the workforce, how are organizations taking additional steps to ensure that their applications are secure? We consistently hear about the cybersecurity skills gap in the news, but how has this issue affected software development? EMA surveyed over 100 professionals across multiple industry verticals, seeking to understand how organizations are tackling this difficult challenge of developing secure software applications. The results were quite eye-opening, revealing that over half of organizations performing software development struggle to fully integrate security into their software development lifecycle. Many organizations across the industries represented here are failing to make critical investments in enhancing the security knowledge of their development teams. Now, at the end of the day, secure software development is a problem that affects not only the end users, but the organizations that develop the software. So the focus of this survey is actually on those organizations which develop software. As part of this survey, we asked respondents to share some of their own thoughts regarding their approach to secure coding practices. We'd like to share a few of these responses in their own words. Including good security practices early in the software development process can avoid costly refactoring or potentially catastrophic security breaches later in the application's lifecycle. It all comes down to good coders on your team. If you can get the right people in there, then you should be ahead of any intrusions. I think the industry just needs more development and learning at the base. Our approach is rethinking security and integrating it into the development process. The most common mistake in security is to treat it as a single step in the process when security should be comprehensive and systematic. Now let's look at some of the interesting trends in the research responses. We found that 69% of organizations have SDLCs that miss critical security steps. We found that 25% of organizations have adopted a shift left SDLC model, and 5% are still using a legacy security model. 95% of organizations do utilize code reviews for secure coding, but only 87% train their employees on secure coding practices. 100% of organizations surveyed using a combination of code reviews, code scanning tools, and third-party training saw improvements in their code security. One of the key questions this research wanted to analyze is how organizations are incorporating security into their software development life cycles, and look at the effectiveness of each approach. When analyzing software development life cycles in use by organizations, several patterns emerged. Most complete security SDLCs, which included security planning, implementation, and validation, fit into one of two models. Legacy models, in which security planning begins after software functionality has been planned and designed, or the more modern shift left model, in which security is planned and developed concurrently with software functionality. Some organizations clearly struggle with security in their SDLC, sometimes missing critical steps, including planning, validation, and sometimes even implementation. When looking at complete security SDLCs, shift left does appear to be the most adopted strategy, but this only accounts for 25% of respondents. Security appears to be a struggle for many organizations, with almost 70% of organizations missing security steps in their SDLC. Almost half of respondents stated their organization does not dedicate a step in the SDLC for security validation. Another 20% of organizations don't plan their application security and instead rely heavily on implementation and validation. Some organizations, 4%, do not even have a dedicated implementation step for security. So how are organizations attempting to secure their code? For this research, EMA looked at how often organizations utilize code reviews, code scanning tools, and secure code training. All three strategies did have a percentage of organizations that abandoned their usage, with 2% of organizations abandoning code reviews, 6% abandoning code scanning tools, and 7% abandoning training programs. Across all three strategies, the most common reason for abandoning or never utilizing the strategies was not lack of effectiveness, but instead concern over productivity impacts. Examining training methodology, we found that most organizations utilize training that has been developed in-house, or sometimes a combination of in-house and third-party training. While productivity impacts were the most common reason for investing in training, some other interesting reasons included the lack of training options available in the market, lack of understanding of the training, or usage of black box security tests and vulnerability scans instead of training. Additionally, several confused respondents believe that their cloud service provider protects their applications from attacks and that no additional security investment is needed. Unfortunately, CSPs provide no protection for cloud application vulnerabilities as part of the shared responsibility model. Examining training frequency for the organizations which do conduct training, we found that the most common training frequency was continuous training, with monthly training a distant second. So now that we've explored the most common code security strategies, let's take a look at the performance of these strategies. When examining SDLC strategies, legacy software development life cycles often provided more productive hours for developers than shift left. However, this productivity improvement comes at a cost, both in security costs and overall development costs. Legacy security SDLC provides the illusion of more productive hours, but at the cost of spending more hours later fixing vulnerabilities. The two most commonly used code security models, code reviews and scanning tools, provide some interesting data when analyzing their effectiveness. Code reviews appear to be very hit or miss, with 50% of organizations that don't conduct code reviews outperforming 75% of those that do. Undoubtedly, this has more to do with the skill of the reviewers and less to do with the review process itself. Code scanning tools only provide a minimal advantage over not using tools. Overall, only 10% of organizations prevented a higher percentage of vulnerabilities than organizations not using code scanning tools. Code scanning tools are often very expensive, and this raises the question, are organizations truly getting the value they should from these tools? When it comes to improving code security, training seems to be an underutilized method with a high return on investment. Organizations that don't have training only saw a 75% improvement in their security versus over 96% if they utilize training. While performance of third-party developed training provides only a slight competitive advantage over in-house training, developing and maintaining training in-house can be very expensive, requiring an entire team with very specialized skill sets to keep that training up to date. Clearly, third-party training provides a more realistic option and a better return on investment. When examining training frequency versus vulnerabilities prevented, while continuous training did not experience as high of an improvement in productive hours as other strategies, long-term usage of continuous training was the leading strategy for decreasing development cost. This is likely due to developers spending less time after initial development fixing security vulnerabilities. So here are the most important takeaways from this presentation on secure coding practices. After reviewing the data, EMA believes that the best approach to secure software development is a combination of code reviews, code scanning tools, and a stronger emphasis on continuous third-party training. Significantly important is adopting a full security SDLC, including planning, implementation, and validation. While a shift-left approach does appear to be more effective, even adopting a legacy security model would be preferable to the incomplete security SDLCs used by almost 70% of organizations today. All too often, when it comes to cybersecurity, the human element is the most overlooked component of any system. With lowest adoption rates and highest code security improvement rates, third-party training appears to be the critical component in which some organizations are failing to invest. Code reviews without training may ultimately prove to be futile efforts, simply checking a compliance box that the code was reviewed. After all, how can those reviewing the code understand whether the code is secure if those reviewers haven't been given the proper training in the first place? Across all industry verticals, software development must shift its focus away from heavily relying on code scanning tools and more on people and processes. The consequences for failing to correct this approach to secure coding are far-reaching, beyond even the organizations developing the software and affecting every user of these vulnerable applications. So thank you for taking the time to watch this presentation today, and we hope you found this information useful. For more information about our sponsor and how they can help solve your secure coding challenges, please visit securityjourney.com. Keep up to date in industry trends with Chris and I by following us on LinkedIn. Finally, download the full report at enterprisemanagement.com, and please reach out to me if you have any questions about this report or the presentation. Thank you for watching and have a wonderful day.